Your daughter calls from nowhere. Her voice is calm, detached, and final. Mom, we're flying to Europe tomorrow. I sold the Folly Beach cottage and the truck. We needed the money. You'll be fine. Bye. The line cuts before the word goodbye can mean anything. The world doesn't crash. It just tilts slightly. Like a picture frame coming loose. My name is Evelyn Carter, 71, born and still stubborn in Charleston, South Carolina. That morning, I was waiting in Dr. Leary's office, surrounded by pastel walls and old magazines when the call arrived. The nurse's sneakers squeaked across the tiles. The air smelled like lemon disinfectant and faint regret. For a few seconds, I stared at the phone as if another sentence might appear. It didn't. Grace had spoken her truth, cold, efficient, and rehearsed. 45 years of sacrifice condensed into 14 words. When the nurse called my name, I stood automatically. My body knew what to do even if my mind didn't. Blood pressure, normal. Heartbeat, steady. The doctor smiled and said, "You're in good shape, Mrs. Carter. Keep walking. Keep breathing. If only survival were as simple as exercise." On the way out, I passed a family laughing in the corridor. Their sound hit me like sunlight. I wondered when Grace and I had stopped laughing that way, when love had become something you managed instead of felt. Outside, Charleston breathed its heavy salt air. Seagulls cut across a pale winter sky. The marsh smelled of tidewater and memory. I took the bus because I no longer owned a car. My daughter had sold it. Across from me, a young couple whispered about honeymoon plans. I turned my face to the window. The city blurred. Porches, palms, the same streets Henry and I once drove together every Sunday morning. Henry, 6 months gone, but never silent. 3 days before his heart failed over breakfast, he had slid a manila envelope across our kitchen table. "If something happens to me," he said, "put this away. Open it only when you feel ready." I tucked it into the dresser drawer and forgotten, until now. Memory can be cruel. It hides what we need until pain demands. We find it. I thought of the cottage on Folly Beach. The cracked porch boards Henry refused to replace because he said they remembered every storm. I thought of the truck he washed each Sunday like a ritual, humming gospel under his breath. Grace had sold both without a flicker of hesitation. The bus rattled across the bridge. The Cooper River flashed silver in the sun, waves breaking against the pylons like applause for an act I hadn't agreed to perform. I realized I wasn't crying. The absence of tears felt foreign, almost dangerous. Anger might have been easier. But what I felt was focus, thin, clear, and cold. When we reached my stop, I stepped off into the damp heat. Live oaks leaned over the street, their branches heavy with moss. My neighbor, Mrs. Langford, waved from her porch. "Evelyn, you all right, honey?" "I'm fine," I lied. She smiled, unconvinced. Women like her could smell heartbreak the way dogs sense rain. Inside, the house was too neat. The air too still. I set my purse down on the counter and looked at the empty chair where Henry used to read the morning paper. His glasses still rested on the windowsill, a faint dust line marking their shape. I walked to the bedroom, opened the top drawer, and there it was, the envelope, untouched, patient, heavier than memory, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the bed and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant call of a ship's horn on the river. Some truths should meet the world at dusk, not daylight. The clock on the wall ticked steady like a heartbeat refusing surrender. I pressed the envelope to my chest. The paper felt cool, fragile, alive. Somewhere between grief and fury, I made a promise to myself. They may have taken my house, my truck, and my comfort, but not my dignity. Never that. Outside, a breeze rattled the window frame, and I heard Henry's voice in memory, gentle but firm. "When people show you what they value, believe them. And keep your own secrets safe." I stood, walked to the sink, and poured myself a glass of water. My reflection in the kitchen window looked older, steadier, and strangely calm. The woman staring back wasn't a victim. She was a witness. And soon she would be the judge. Some people shout when they're betrayed. Others wait, and waiting when you know what's coming can be the sharpest form of justice. I didn't open the envelope that night, not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I wanted to open it on my own terms. When people steal your choices, you learn the power of waiting. The house creaked with the small noises of memory, pipes sighing, floorboards settling, the echo of Henry's favorite jazz station still tuned low on the kitchen radio. I made tea instead of dinner. Widowhood had taught me how to live on small rituals. 1 cup, 1 spoon, 1 clean plate. I sat in Henry's armchair and stared at the manila envelope resting on the coffee table. The lamplight pooled over it like confession. What kind of man prepares for his own death with paperwork? The kind who knows his wife and suspects his daughter. Grace had always been brilliant in a way that scared people. She could calculate emotion the way accountants calculate interest, coldly, accurately, without pause. Marcus, her husband, had been different. All talk and too many cologne samples, the kind of charm that left stains. He never looked at me directly, only at what I owned. Now the ownership was his, or so he thought. The night thickened around the windows. A faraway train moaned across the marsh, and somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. I traced the edge of the envelope with my finger. If Henry had meant it as protection, it was working. The not knowing had become armor. At 11, I turned off the lamp and went to bed. Sleep came shallow, full of voices. Grace at 8 showing me her first report card. Henry humming off key as he painted the porch rails. The 3 of us at Folly Beach, the smell of sunscreen and salt. The dream shifted. The cottage became smaller, darker, then disappeared. When I woke, my hand was gripping the bedsheet, knuckles white. Morning arrived pale and reluctant. I brewed coffee the way Henry liked it. 2 scoops, 1 pinch of salt, no sugar. The steam curled upward like a question I didn't want to answer. I carried the mug to the dresser and looked at the envelope again. It hadn't moved, but something in me had. I slid a knife gently under the flap. The glue gave way with a sound so small it felt sacred. Inside were several documents, folded with a precision that was unmistakably Henry's. On top lay a single page in his handwriting. Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I've kept my promise to leave you prepared. I invested more than you ever knew. Keep quiet about it. Protect what's yours. And if Grace ever betrays you, remember, silence is the sharpest weapon. I read it twice before I could breathe. The papers beneath it were deeds, statements, certificates, proof of a fortune I never suspected. Henry, the school bus driver who mended his own shoes, had built a hidden empire brick by brick. He had been saving not just for comfort, but for strategy. The irony struck deep. Grace had sold the only house she thought we had, never knowing I owned 6 more. She'd cashed in memories while sitting on an invisible mountain. I closed the envelope, hands trembling. A strange calm rose in me again. Not forgiveness, not yet, but focus. There was work to do. By late morning, I'd walked to the bus stop, the manila envelope tucked in my bag. The city was alive with routine, students rushing, vendors shouting, the smell of bread from the corner bakery. Normal life, indifferent to mine. Mr. Wallace's office sat in an old building downtown, a remnant of Charleston's past. Tall windows, marble steps, a clock that still ticked by faith rather than batteries. He had been Henry's attorney for decades, and the only person who attended the funeral without bringing pity. Mrs. Carter, he said, rising as I entered. It's good to see you, though I wish it were under easier circumstances. I'm beginning to think ease is overrated, I said. He smiled at that. When I placed the envelope on his desk, he adjusted his glasses and began to read. With each page, his eyebrows climbed higher. Henry was thorough, he murmured. You are, by every legal definition, a wealthy woman. I waited. And Grace? Grace doesn't appear anywhere in these documents. Everything is in your name through a holding company, H.C. Holdings, Henry's initials. The man couldn't resist a clue. Mr. Wallace leaned back. Do you wish to press charges for the sale of the cottage? You have every right. I shook my head. No, not yet. He studied me. Then what do you intend to do? I looked out the window. The city shimmered in the noon heat, church bells distant and steady. I intend to let them believe I'm broke. For now. Wallace nodded slowly, understanding more than I said. Then you'll need patience. I've been practicing, I told him. When I left the office, the street smelled of asphalt and magnolia. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I was no longer the woman who answered the phone and accepted loss. I was a strategist, learning the rules of her own game. The truth was a currency, and for the first time, I was rich enough to spend it wisely. I walked to the bus stop and waited under the hard blue sky. Grace thought she had buried me in debt. Marcus thought he'd outsmarted an old woman. Neither knew they'd just funded my education in quiet revenge. And here's what most people never admit. When you stop reacting, you start deciding. When you stop pleading, you start planning. That's where real justice begins. If you've ever been underestimated, keep listening. This story isn't about losing everything. It's about learning what was yours all along, and how to make silence speak louder than any apology. The morning light in Charleston has a way of telling the truth. It doesn't burst in. It seeps through, steady and slow, touching dust before faces. That day, it crept across my dresser and found the manila envelope I'd placed there the night before. The seal was broken now, but the contents were a map I didn't yet understand. I poured coffee and read Henry's letter again. His handwriting was as deliberate as his silences. He had written only one line more than what I'd read to Mr. Wallace yesterday. Everything hidden has a reason. When you find the pattern, follow it quietly. A pattern. Henry had loved patterns. Crossword puzzles. Tide charts, jazz rhythms, the way life repeated itself until you noticed the difference. He believed the smallest variations carried the biggest truths. I spread the papers out on the dining table, the same table where Grace had once done her homework, where Henry and I had once shared late-night peach cobbler after hurricanes passed. Now it was an investigation desk. Deeds, contracts, a certificate from a company I'd never heard of, Palmetto Investments, LLC. There were property listings from Savannah, a letter of ownership from a shell company registered offshore, and an account statement showing numbers I could barely comprehend. Henry Carter, the man who bought used tools and recycled envelopes, had built a secret life of abundance, and he'd done it without telling anyone, not even me. The revelation didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like a test. He had trusted me to discover this when I was ready, not when I was desperate. Still, one document stood out. A small note, handwritten, different ink, newer paper. It wasn't signed, but I recognized Henry's voice immediately. In the event of my passing, keep Grace distant until you can see her motives clearly. I trust your heart, not hers. You'll know when to act. I sat back in my chair. The words weren't cruel. They were cautious. The kind of caution born from experience, not bitterness. Henry had seen something I hadn't, and now I was catching up. I made a list on the back of an old grocery receipt. 1. Find out what Palmetto Investments really was. 2. Secure the deeds. 3. Keep quiet. The simplest plans are sometimes the hardest to follow. Silence has gravity. It pulls on your bones. Around noon, I walked down to Mrs. Langford's porch, pretending to borrow sugar. She was shelling peas into a metal bowl, wearing the same cotton dress she'd worn to Henry's funeral. Hot day for secrets, she said without looking up. I froze. Excuse me? She smiled faintly. You've been pacing your house since sunrise. That means either bad news or good trouble. I'm hoping for the second. I laughed, a short, uncertain sound. Maybe both, I said. She tilted her head. Henry used to come by and talk investments with my late husband. Said he was teaching himself how to turn patience into income. You think that's what he left you? Her question hung in the humid air like a riddle. I think he left me instructions, I answered. Mrs. Langford nodded slowly. Then you best read carefully. Instructions can save a soul or ruin one depending who follows them. When I returned home, I opened the dresser again. There was a faint hollow thump beneath the drawer. Henry was an engineer by habit, even when he wasn't working. I knelt, ran my fingers under the wood panel, and felt the edge of a second compartment. It took a butter knife and steady hands, But the board lifted free. Inside was another envelope, smaller. Older, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, no name, no label. Only the faint scent of cedar and the echo of someone's intention. I carried it to the window. Light revealed a thin outline of something inside, a photograph maybe, or a document folded too tightly, but my hands refused to open it just yet. I had learned that timing was part of understanding. Henry once told me, every secret carries its own schedule. If you open it too soon, it collapses under explanation. I placed the smaller envelope beside the first one and stared at both. 2 layers of truth, one financial, one unknown, one built to protect me, the other perhaps to test me. The phone rang once, sharp, then again. I didn't move. It stopped. Silence can feel like a decision when you've already chosen not to answer. Outside, thunder murmured over the harbor. Rain began tapping the windows like patient fingers. Somewhere in that rhythm, I felt Henry's presence urging me to wait just one more day. I whispered to the empty room, "You always did like suspense." The storm answered in kind. If you've ever uncovered a truth too big to name, you know that waiting isn't weakness, it's preparation. And sometimes the longest silence hides the loudest revelation. Stay with me. Because what waited inside that second envelope wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. And the kind of justice that doesn't ask permission to exist. By evening, the rain had stopped but left the world smelling like iron and wet soil. Charleston after a storm always feels older, as if the city remembers everything it's ever lost. I sat by the window, the smaller envelope still sealed. Resting on my lap like a verdict waiting for a judge, the house hummed with power again, the hum of the refrigerator, the drip of the gutter, the pulse of quiet after thunder. I thought about Grace. She hadn't called since that morning 2 days ago. Not a message, not a text, not even guilt disguised as courtesy. Silence was her inheritance. Henry used to say Grace was born impatient, a storm that never checks the forecast. He said it with pride back then. Now I heard it as prophecy. At 7, I finally stood, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle Henry had bought years earlier. He'd written "Save for Victory" on the cork with a black marker. I smiled at the irony. Maybe this was victory. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind that walks in uninvited. The smaller envelope sat on the counter. I traced its edges once, then tore it open. Inside, a photograph, old, black and white, grainy. Henry in his 20s, standing in front of a brick building I didn't recognize. Next to him, another woman. Younger than I'd ever been when we met. She wore a nurse's uniform, a soft smile, a hand resting on his arm. For a moment, the room tilted again, same as it had when Grace called. Betrayal carries a familiar gravity. But then I noticed something. The woman wasn't looking at Henry. She was looking past him, toward a sign half cropped out of the frame. Charleston Mercy Hospital. 1985, the year Grace was born. My stomach turned cold. I flipped the photo over. On the back, Henry's handwriting. Steady, factual, like always. She saved our daughter's life. You'll meet her again when it's time. The words bled through the paper like old ink veins. I stared until the letters blurred. Henry's secrets had never been cruel. They were careful. Every one of them existed for a reason. But what reason could tie this woman, this hospital, and my husband's hidden fortune? I checked the envelope again. There was a folded slip of blue paper inside, thin as a receipt. It read, Box 214, Riverfront Storage. Code 419, a code. A location. Henry, even from the grave, still giving assignments. I sat down at the table, feeling the pulse of curiosity replace the ache of anger. The longer I looked at the photo, the more it became less about jealousy and more about context. Grace's birth had been complicated. I remembered the long nights, the emergency surgery, the doctor saying, "We almost lost them both." Maybe that woman wasn't a rival at all, but a savior. Still, the question remained, why hide it? Why the secrecy, the codes, the layers? The rain started again, softer this time, like applause for a decision. I grabbed my coat, locked the door, and drove Henry's old backup truck, the one he used for fishing trips, the one Grace never knew existed. Its engine coughed to life, a stubborn old heartbeat refusing silence. Riverfront storage sat by the harbor, a row of metal doors under flickering lights. The guard at the gate looked up, unimpressed. "Evening, ma'am. Late hour for moving boxes." "Sometimes the past keeps its own hours," I said. Inside, the corridor smelled of rust and dust. I found box 214, the padlock cold beneath my fingers. I entered the code, 419, and the lock clicked open. The door lifted with a metallic sigh. Inside were shelves lined with boxes, each labeled in Henry's handwriting. Receipts, ledgers, old blueprints, and at the center, a cedar chest, polished, immaculate, too deliberate to be casual storage. I knelt, ran a hand across its lid, and lifted it open. Inside, stacks of files bound with ribbon and a small notebook wrapped in wax paper. The first page bore a single title, Project Palmetto. Each page that followed was a ledger of names, dates, and deposits. Money transferred quietly to accounts marked with initials, not full names. Some were local, others international. It wasn't crime. It was strategy. Henry had been funneling money into causes, charities, and foundations under pseudonyms. At the back of the notebook was one last note. Written in his small, careful script, "Justice doesn't wait for courts. It waits for courage." I sat there in the storage unit, surrounded by evidence of a man I was only beginning to understand. He hadn't been hiding wealth. He'd been building a mechanism for fairness, an invisible system to right quiet wrongs. And somehow, I had inherited not just his assets, but his unfinished mission. I closed the chest, locked it again, and leaned against the metal door as rain echoed above. The air smelled like salt and cedar and inevitability. Grace thought I was powerless. Marcus thought I was irrelevant. But the truth is, power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hums in the dark, waiting for the right hands to turn the key. If you've ever discovered that someone you loved had been planning justice behind your back, you'll understand revelation isn't about shock. It's about readiness. And I was ready, because when the next storm came, and it would, I wasn't the widow anymore. I was the keeper of a legacy built on quiet retribution. Morning light again. But this one felt sharper, as if it had watched what I found last night and decided to ask questions of its own. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window until the horizon bled orange. The notebook opened before me. Project Palmetto, page after page of numbers and initials that whispered in riddles. Henry always said numbers were honest until someone taught them to lie. Now, staring at his handwriting, I wondered which part of him I was supposed to believe, the husband I buried or the architect of hidden empires. By 7, I was dressed and driving toward Mr. Wallace's office, the same old lawyer who'd handed me Henry's first envelope. The truck groaned down East Bay Street like an old friend reluctantly keeping secrets. The city was waking, coffee shops hissing steam, church bells clanging too earnestly for sinners who'd already made peace with their sins. Wallace's building sat behind a narrow courtyard choked with ivy. He was waiting, as if he'd expected me. "Mrs. Carter," he said, standing by the window, glasses low on his nose. "You found the second envelope." He didn't ask if. He said you found. "How long have you known Mr. Wallace?" I asked, setting the folder on his desk. He smiled thinly. "Long enough to know Henry never did anything by accident." He gestured to the chair across from him, and I sat. He opened the notebook like it was a relic. "Project Palmetto," he murmured. "He told me once that if the world ever turned too cruel, this would balance it." "Balance what?" I asked. Wallace hesitated. "Debt, not the financial kind, the moral kind." Henry believed certain people built their fortunes on silence and suffering. He wanted to reallocate what he called unearned luck. I stared at him. "You mean redistribution? Secret philanthropy. In principle, yes, Wallace said, but Henry wasn't giving handouts. He was giving back what was taken. Quietly, legally, almost righteously. He slid a file toward me. This is part of the trust. He called it the Justice Clause. You have full control now. The document listed properties, offshore holdings, and... My breath caught. Names. Familiar ones. One of them was Marcus Hale, Grace's husband. I looked up. Why is his name here? Wallace's expression didn't change, but his voice softened. Because Henry suspected him of embezzling funds from Palmetto accounts. Small amounts at first, then bigger. He started tracing the money 6 months before his heart attack. Are you saying... I'm saying Henry's death might not have been natural. The room seemed to tilt. The sunlight flickered through the blinds like Morse code. Wallace folded his hands. Henry told me if anything happened, I was to wait until you found both envelopes. Only then should I tell you the truth. What truth exactly? That Henry didn't trust the people closest to him. Not Grace, not Marcus. Especially Marcus. I felt the air leave my lungs. Grace, my daughter, she had chosen Marcus over her father's warnings. Over mine. And now, maybe, she had chosen wrong in ways none of us could afford. Wallace leaned back. He believed Marcus married Grace for access. The man was drowning in debt from bad investments. Palmetto's accounts were convenient lifeboats. I thought of the photograph from the smaller envelope. The woman in the nurse's uniform, the sign Charleston Mercy Hospital. Do you know who she is? I asked. He nodded slowly. Her name was Dr. Miriam Cole. She worked at the hospital during Grace's birth. Henry set up a trust fund under her name as part of Palmetto. She was helping him audit irregularities in the accounts. Is she still alive? Wallace's eyes drifted to the window. No, she died 2 weeks before Henry, car accident. A hollow sound escaped my throat. 2 deaths. 2 weeks apart, both too convenient. And suddenly all Henry's riddles stopped feeling poetic. They felt like warnings written by a man running out of time. Wallace closed the notebook gently. Evelyn, I need you to be careful. If Marcus or anyone else suspects you've uncovered this, they'll come looking. Not for you, but for control. Control of what? Of justice, he said simply. And the money that funds it. Outside, a church bell struck 9. Its echo filled the office like an accusation. I stood, clutching the file, my heart thudding like it wanted to leave before I did. As I reached the door, Wallace added quietly, Henry once told me something I didn't understand until now. He said, the ones who look harmless are usually building the sharpest weapons. The door clicked behind me. Charleston's air felt heavier than it had an hour ago. I looked down at the folder. Marcus's name circled in Henry's own hand. Sometimes, grief disguises itself as clarity. Sometimes, it's the same thing. And as I drove home, one thought refused to fade. If Henry was right about Marcus, then Grace wasn't just complicit. She was in danger. I didn't know yet which scared me more. The thought that my daughter had betrayed us, or the thought that she hadn't realized she was next. Because once you open a door built on lies, you don't get to close it quietly again. If you've ever uncovered a truth that changed how you remember someone you love, you know, there's no such thing as moving on. There's only moving deeper. Stay close. What comes next will decide whether Evelyn survives her husband's last plan, or becomes the next piece on his unfinished board. The drive home blurred into a gray ribbon of road. I couldn't feel the steering wheel, only the weight of what I'd learned sitting behind my ribs. Henry's project wasn't just a trust, it was a web. And someone had been tugging at its strings long before I noticed. Back home, the house didn't feel like home anymore. The quiet had a new sound, like someone had rearranged the silence. I dropped the folder on the kitchen table, poured a cup of coffee, and stared at the wall where Henry's clock ticked too loudly. Marcus. Every letter of his name tasted metallic now. I opened the file again, tracing the ink of Henry's handwriting. There were marginal notes beside Marcus's name, dates, numbers, and one phrase underlined twice, cross-verify with MC Miriam Cole. My pulse quickened. I typed her name into the laptop. The internet responded with its usual indifference. A few local obituaries, A short article. Dr. Miriam Cole, 58, killed in a single car crash on Highway 61. Authorities suspect brake failure. No foul play. No foul play. The phrase always feels like an insult to intelligence. I clicked deeper. A hospital newsletter, archived. There she was, smiling beside a caption. Dr. Cole leads research on postnatal recovery at Mercy. The article dated back 25 years, right around Grace's birth. The photo's background caught my attention. A metal cabinet. A nameplate half visible. Research Fund BI magnified the image. The second line under the title read, Palmetto Medical Grant. So Henry's Project Palmetto wasn't just financial justice. It was biological, medical, a cover for something more human. A chill climbed my spine. If Miriam was helping him trace Marcus's embezzlement, why link her to a medical grant from decades ago? Unless Marcus had found her before she could speak. The coffee had gone cold. I took a sip anyway, needing the bitterness to keep the thoughts sharp. That's when I heard it. A soft hum from outside, a car engine, idling. I walked to the window, careful not to move the curtains too far. A silver sedan sat across the street, headlights dimmed. Someone inside flicked a cigarette, the brief spark revealing a silhouette. Male. Watching. I waited. 3 minutes, 5. The car didn't move. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. One message. Stop asking about Miriam. My throat closed. I stepped back from the window, pulse hammering against my skin. I typed back. Who is this? No reply. Another message came through instead. Henry died because he couldn't stop digging. Don't make the same mistake. The car started. Tail lights glowing red like a warning. Then it was gone. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, the kind of quiet that knows things. I sat down, forcing my breath steady. Whoever they were, they knew what I'd found, which meant Henry's death wasn't coincidence. It was consequence. I opened the laptop again, this time searching for accidents around the date of Henry's death. 2 results stood out. Dr. Miriam Cole, fatal crash. Henry Carter, sudden heart attack. Found alone at home. 2 weeks apart. Same county. Same investigator listed on both reports. Detective R. Finch. The name pulsed like a key in a locked door. I picked up the phone, dialed the Charleston PD information desk, and asked to be connected to Detective Finch. After a few transfers, a woman's tired voice came through. Finch, who's calling? This is Evelyn Carter. You investigated my husband's death last year. A pause. Then, yes, I remember, Mrs. Carter. My condolences. What can I do for you? I think my husband's death might be connected to Dr. Miriam Cole's accident. You worked both cases. Her voice stiffened. Mrs. Carter, both were ruled closed. Heart failure and mechanical malfunction. I'm not sure. Detective, I interrupted. They both worked on something called Project Palmetto. Do you recall that term? Silence, then a low exhale. Where did you hear that name? I found it in Henry's papers. Another pause. Listen, Mrs. Carter, whatever you think you found, stop. Those files were sealed. Some of us barely kept our jobs after that case. If you value your safety, walk away. She hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, the dial tone stretching into the kind of silence that only follows truth. Files sealed. Jobs threatened. Henry hadn't just been funding. Justice. He had been building something someone wanted. Buried, the walls of the kitchen seemed to lean closer. Grace's laughter echoed, faintly from memory, a ghost of innocence I wasn't sure existed anymore. If Marcus had access to Palmetto, and Miriam had died for knowing too much, then Grace was either part of it or a pawn trapped in it. The thought landed like cold iron in my chest. I closed the laptop, stood by the window again, and whispered to the dark street outside. I'm not walking away. Henry, not this time. Somewhere beyond the glass, a dog barked, and the night swallowed the sound whole. In Charleston, even shadows keep records, and I was ready to start reading them. When the truth begins to follow you home, it's no longer curiosity, it's destiny knocking. Stay close. In the next chapter, You'll see what happens when Evelyn decides to open the last door Henry left locked. By morning, the street was empty again. The silver car never came back, but its absence felt louder than its presence. Charleston wore its weekday mask, bright, polite, pretending, but behind the smiles and the smell of magnolia, I could feel the city watching. I hadn't slept. I didn't need to. The moment Detective Finch hung up, I knew what I had to do. Henry had always left patterns, trails of logic disguised as sentiment. And Project Palmetto wasn't a project. It was a map. I spread his old papers across the kitchen table, each page yellowed and soft. Numbers, dates, initials. Some matched the ledgers I'd seen in the storage unit. But at the corner of one page, faint pencil marks spelled out a string of letters, Palmetto, running vertically, like the first line of a cipher. I tried reading the first letter of each line. Together, they formed a sentence so deliberate it made my skin prickle. Poison always leaves mercy in the smallest dose. Poison. I stared at the words, my breath shallow. Henry's death had been ruled a heart attack, sudden, quiet. But poison could mimic almost anything if it was clever enough. And Henry, he'd been clever enough to leave me the antidote in words. I flipped through the rest of the notes. Several pages bore tiny annotations beside financial entries. D. K. L. I thought they were random until I realized something. Every initial matched a chemical symbol. K for potassium, L for lithium, D. Diazepam. Formula. A code, my heart pounded. Henry had buried a record of what killed him. Inside the accounting of his justice fund, Palmetto wasn't just about redistributing wealth. It was about hiding truth inside the machinery of numbers. The front door creaked. I froze. Footsteps. Mom? Grace's voice. I exhaled, tension snapping loose from my shoulders. Grace, you startled me. She stepped inside, wearing sunglasses, though it was cloudy outside. You haven't been answering your phone. I've been busy. Her tone carried the same impatience Henry used to joke about, the one that now sounded like guilt. Busy doing what? Marcus said you've been asking strange questions. The mention of his name felt like grit in my teeth. Has Marcus been checking up on me? Grace hesitated. He's worried about you. I smiled faintly. Marcus doesn't worry. He calculates, she frowned. You're being unfair. He's just trying to help. Help what, Grace? Hide what your father built? Or clean up after it? The words came out sharper than I intended. She blinked, taken aback. What are you talking about? I held up one of the documents, the Palmetto ledger, Henry's handwriting still alive in ink. Did you know your husband's name appears in your father's financial records? That Henry suspected him of theft? Her lips parted, eyes widening. That's ridiculous, is it? Because your father died while investigating those accounts, and 2 weeks before that, the woman helping him died in a car crash. A woman named Miriam Cole. The silence that followed wasn't denial. It was fear. Grace's fingers trembled as she removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were red. Marcus told me Miriam was a consultant who got caught in some scandal. He said Dad was covering for her. Covering for her, I repeated. That's the story he gave you? Grace nodded slowly. Mom, are you saying... I'm saying Henry didn't die from a weak heart. The words hung between us like static. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. I continued quietly. He left me a trail, and every part of it points to Marcus. Grace shook her head. No, Marcus loved Dad. Grace, I interrupted. Do you even know where he was the night your father died? She hesitated. Too long. That's what I thought. The kitchen clock ticked 3 times before she spoke again. What are you going to do? I'm going to find the truth. Whether it leads to Marcus or beyond him. Grace looked down, her voice barely a whisper. If you're right, he'll come for you. Then let him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the wind pushed against the window pane like someone trying to listen in. Grace finally stood, tears streaking her cheeks. If Marcus finds out I was here, he'll think I told you something. Then don't tell him you were, I said gently. She nodded, slipped her sunglasses back on, and left without another word. The front door clicked shut, and the air fell still again. I turned back to the papers. Heart still racing, Henry's message replayed in my mind. Poison always leaves mercy in the smallest. Dose, mercy. Henry's morning pills had always been kept in the blue-labeled bottle on the counter, the same one Marcus had refilled for him from the pharmacy, near their office. If there was poison, that's where it began. I picked up my coat. There was only one way to know for sure. Outside, clouds gathered low and gray. The first drop of rain touched my face like punctuation. I started the truck, the engine groaning awake. As I pulled into the street, the rearview mirror caught movement, a dark sedan turning the corner behind me, the same one from last night. I didn't speed up. I wanted them to follow, because sometimes the only way to catch what's hunting you is to let it believe you're still prey. Some secrets kill quietly. Others wait to be seen. Stay close. In the next chapter, Evelyn learns what's really hidden inside Henry's medicine bottle, and who else has been watching her all along. The rain turned steady by the time I reached Cooper's pharmacy, a small brick building wedged between a seafood shack and a shuttered antique store. Henry used to come here every Friday, said the pharmacist. Mr. Cooper reminded him of his father. The bell above the door jingled when I walked in. The place smelled of antiseptic and dusted paper. Behind the counter, a gray-haired man looked up from a ledger. "Mrs. Carter, haven't seen you since." His voice trailed off. "Since Henry's funeral," I finished for him. He nodded, uneasy. "Yes, I'm sorry for your loss." Loss. Such a fragile word for something that had become an investigation. I managed a polite smile. "I need some information, Mr. Cooper, about my husband's prescriptions." He hesitated. "Records are confidential, even for a widow?" His eyes darted to the security camera in the corner, then back to me. "If it's about dosage or renewals, I can look those up." That's a good start. He disappeared into the back office. The rain hammered harder on the awning outside, rhythmic as a metronome. When he returned, he carried a stack of files bound with a rubber band. "Henry Carter," he said, setting them down. "Regular medications, beta blockers, statins, a mild sedative, all common for his condition." "Condition?" I asked. He blinked. His arrhythmia. He'd had it for years. I stared at the list. "Henry never had arrhythmia," Mr. Cooper frowned. "He did, ma'am. Marcus Hale was the one who handled most of his refills. Said Henry didn't like talking about his health. The name dropped into the air like a stone through glass. "Marcus?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Yes, picked up prescriptions for nearly a year. Always polite. Said he was helping with Henry's affairs." A faint tremor rippled through my hands. "Do you still have those prescription slips?" Mr. Cooper hesitated. "I keep everything." "But I shouldn't." I slid a folded 100 across the counter. He looked at it, then at me, then sighed. "Wait here." He disappeared again, this time longer. I counted the seconds by the clock above the counter. When he returned, he handed me 3 slips. "These are copies. Henry Carter, beta blocker, lisinopril, sedative." I looked closer. Each signature bore Henry's name, but the handwriting was off. Heavier, slower, like someone trying to mimic steadiness. "Forged. Do you remember when this started?" I asked. He rubbed his temples. "Late winter? About 2 months before Henry's heart attack. The last refill was the week he died." My pulse thudded against my throat. "Did Marcus ever say where he worked at the time?" Mr. Cooper shrugged. "Some consulting firm. Hale and Partners, I think. Why?" Because I now knew exactly where to look. I thanked him, pocketed the slips, and turned toward the door. That's when I saw it. Through the glass, the silver sedan. Parked across the street. Again. Its windshield gleamed wet under the rain, but I could make out a shape inside. A phone raised, angled toward me. Someone was taking pictures. I forced myself to keep moving. The bell chimed behind me as I stepped out. Rain poured down hard, washing color from the world. I walked fast, but not too fast. Fear makes you visible. The sedan started. Engine low, smooth. I crossed the street toward my truck, keeping the corner of my eye fixed on them. As I reached the door handle, the sedan's window rolled down halfway. A man's voice, calm, Southern, detached, called out, "Mrs. Carter." I froze. "You should stop digging." "You won't like what you find." I turned just enough to meet his eyes, dark, unreadable behind the reflection of rain. "Then you haven't met me," I said. He smiled once, without warmth, and the sedan pulled away. For a moment, I just stood there, rain soaking through my coat, heart beating too loudly for a parking lot. Then I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and let the wipers drag the water away like curtains. The prescription slips lay on the passenger seat, curling at the edges. Evidence, fragile and lethal as confession. Henry's death wasn't random. It had been planned, dosed, timed by someone who knew exactly how to make poison look like mercy. I drove without direction, following instinct more than road signs, until I found myself at St. Jude's Cemetery, the place where Henry rested beneath an oak that seemed older than the idea of faith. I parked, stepped out, and stood before his headstone. The rain had softened to drizzle. "Henry," I whispered, "you knew they'd come after you. That's why you left the codes, the files, everything. You wanted me to see it." The oak branches swayed, whispering above me. I took out the forged slips and tore them in half, letting the pieces scatter across the wet grass. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. One message. The pills weren't the first. "Check the coffee." I looked down at Henry's grave, the rain tracing cold lines across my face. Coffee, Henry's morning ritual, the one Marcus always helped prepare when he visited. If the pills were camouflage, the coffee was delivery, I whispered. "You clever bastard. You didn't just poison him. You built a routine around it." The world felt suddenly smaller, sharper, ready to break. Marcus wasn't just a thief. He was an architect of patience. I turned back toward the truck, soaked, trembling, but steadier than before, because now I had proof, and soon I would have a name behind that silver sedan. When someone turns love into a weapon, justice becomes the only antidote. Stay close. The next part reveals what Evelyn finds when she breaks into Marcus's office, and the file Henry never meant for anyone else to read. Night falls differently when you plan to trespass. It doesn't arrive like rest. It arrives like permission. I parked 2 blocks from Hale and Partners Consulting, Marcus's pride, his fortress of glass and ego. The building glowed faintly against the Charleston skyline. Its upper floors still lit at 10 p.m. No guards outside, just the hum of fluorescent light behind tinted windows. The silver sedan hadn't followed tonight. I made sure of that. 3 decoy turns, 1 unnecessary gas stop, and a half-hour wait by the bridge. Whoever was watching had lost interest, or thought I had. Either way, it was my turn to watch back. I wore Henry's old Navy coat, the one with deep pockets, and gloves thin enough to keep my grip. The rain had stopped, but the air smelled like electricity, that nervous quiet before another storm. The side alley led to the rear entrance, the one Marcus used when he didn't want clients to see him leaving late. I'd seen him do it countless times back when Grace still pretended love was loyalty. The keypad was old, same as my memory. I punched in a pattern I'd once glimpsed when Marcus wasn't careful. 1985, Grace's birth year. Of course. The green light blinked. The lock clicked. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Offices always smell like fear when the lights are off. Dust, toner, and stale ambition. I walked past the reception desk, down a hallway lined with framed motivational quotes. Integrity, vision, trust, words that mean nothing when money speaks louder. Marcus's office door was closed. Frosted glass, gold lettering. I pushed it open. The first thing that hit me wasn't the smell of cologne or cigars. It was lavender. Feminine resent. Someone else had been here. On his desk sat a tumbler with amber residue and a laptop still on sleep mode. The light blinked like a heartbeat. I pressed the space bar, a password prompt. I smiled. Henry used to say every man leaves a key in plain sight. I scanned the room. On the bookshelf, a photo of Marcus and Grace in Paris. scribbled on the frame in black marker. Our forever started here, 0423. I typed it in. The screen unlocked. The desktop was immaculate, except for one folder, PM, closed accounts. I opened it. Inside were scanned documents, spreadsheets, and one video file labeled Carter Review MP4. My hands shook slightly as I double-clicked. The footage was grainy, dated 2 weeks before Henry's death. Marcus sat in this very office, speaking to someone off camera. His voice was low, confident, careless. He's getting suspicious. Keeps asking about the Palmetto transfers. If he digs further, the board will panic. A pause. No, I won't let him ruin this. The sedatives will slow him down. When it happens, it'll look like his heart finally gave out. My stomach clenched. Another voice answered. Muffled, older, calm. And the doctor? Marcus. Handled. Same way. The room on the screen went silent. Marcus leaned back, smiling faintly. Justice can't exist without sacrifice. He taught me that. I stopped the video, breath frozen halfway. The cursor blinked on a still frame of his face, serene. Unbothered. Henry's murder, confirmed by his own arrogance, Dr. Miriam Cole, silenced for knowing too much. And now, me, the next loose end. I copied the file onto a flash drive from my pocket and checked the time. 10:48. As I reached for the door, my reflection caught in the glass wall. Behind it, movement. Someone was standing at the far end of the hallway, watching, a tall silhouette, motionless. I switched off the office light. Darkness folded over me. My pulse thudded in my ears. The shadow didn't move. Then, slowly, it began walking toward the door. I scanned the room, only one exit. I slipped behind the desk and crouched low, pressing my back against the cabinet. The footsteps drew closer, steady, deliberate. A hand tested the doorknob. Metal clicked once, then silence. Through the narrow slit beneath the glass, I saw a faint red glow. A cigarette tip. The same car. The same watcher. He waited for 5 breaths, then turned and walked away. The echo of his shoes trailed off down the hall. I stayed still until my knees ached, then exhaled slowly and stood. My hands were shaking, but my mind was steady. I turned to the window. The city lights shimmered against the harbor. Henry had once said Charleston's beauty was its camouflage, a place that hides sin under Spanish moss. He was right. I left the office quietly, retracing my steps through the corridor. The rain had started again, soft and cold, by the time I reached the truck. The flash drive felt heavy in my pocket, heavier than guilt, heavier than grief. When I turned the key in the ignition, the radio crackled alive on an old jazz station, Henry's song, the same tune that had played the night he died. Coincidence, maybe, or warning. I drove home in silence, every red light feeling like a question I couldn't yet answer. But one thing was certain now. Marcus hadn't just killed for greed. He'd killed for control, and control doesn't surrender quietly. If you've ever looked evil straight in the face and found calm instead of fear, you know that calm is where justice begins. Stay with me. In the next part, Evelyn takes the evidence to Wallace and learns that the video wasn't the only file Marcus left behind. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened, clean but not innocent. I hadn't slept. The flash drive sat on the table beside my coffee, its silver edge catching the morning light like a blade. I kept replaying Marcus's voice in my head, that calm confession, that deliberate cruelty, but another voice echoed under it. One I hadn't questioned until now. Wallace's. He'd known about Palmetto, about Miriam, about Henry's suspicions, and yet he'd told me nothing until I found the evidence myself. If justice was Henry's design, Wallace had been the architect's right hand. And every architect keeps blueprints hidden even from their allies. At 9 sharp, I walked into his office without calling ahead. The secretary opened her mouth to stop me, but my look said not today. Wallace was standing by the window, back turned, hands clasped. His reflection in the glass looked older, heavier, When he turned, surprise flickered just once before his face rearranged itself into calm professionalism. "Mrs. Carter, you look awake," I said, "which is more than I can say for my husband, or the doctor who tried to save him." He blinked slowly. "I'm going to assume that means you found something." I placed the flash drive on his desk. It landed with a small metallic click. "You could say that." He stared at it, then at me. "What's on it?" "Marcus," I said. "Talking about Henry, about Miriam, about murder." The word hung in the room like a knife point. Wallace didn't reach for the drive. Instead, he walked to the cabinet and poured 2 glasses of water. "Before we talk about what's on that file," he said quietly, "you need to understand what it will cost to use it." "Cost?" I asked. He nodded. "You release this and the Palmetto network collapses. Every fund, every trust Henry built, gone. The charities, the women's foundations, the scholarships, all traced back to illegal transfers once Marcus's confession becomes public. Henry's legacy dies with Marcus's reputation." I stared at him. "So you're saying I should stay quiet?" "I'm saying you should think carefully. Justice isn't just punishment, Evelyn. It's preservation." Something in his voice, that subtle calm, felt wrong, rehearsed. I leaned forward. "You sound like a man protecting more than a legacy." His jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" "You knew," I said softly. "About Marcus. About the accounts. About Henry's investigation. You let him walk free after Henry died." Wallace exhaled through his nose. "You're not entirely wrong, but you're not entirely right either." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were documents stamped confidential. He slid them toward me. "This is what Henry left me to guard. The contingency plan." I opened it. Contracts, ledgers, offshore routing numbers, all familiar. But at the bottom, a list of names. Not just Marcus Hale, not just Miriam Cole. 10 others, politicians, bankers, a judge, every one of them connected to Palmetto. Henry hadn't just been funding justice. He'd been controlling it, a secret network of money and influence, meant to steer outcomes quietly from behind the curtain. And Wallace was the keeper. I looked up. "You were never just his lawyer." Wallace smiled sadly. "No, I was his executor, his partner. His friend?" "His accomplice," I said. He didn't deny it. Henry believed the law couldn't fix what it created. He built his own version. Miriam helped him track the flow. Marcus helped him hide it. When Henry realized Marcus was siphoning funds for himself, it was too late. "So he killed him?" "No," Wallace said evenly. "He planned to expose him, publicly. Marcus found out first." I pressed my palms flat on the desk. "You could have stopped it." I tried. His voice cracked for the first time. But by the time I reached Henry's house that morning, he was already gone. I watched him closely.
"And Miriam?"
He hesitated too long. "Collateral damage!" The words hit like a slap. He finally reached for the flash drive, turning it in his fingers. "You have no idea how dangerous this is." Marcus was just the surface. The people above him, they'll erase everything before they let this leak. I stepped closer. "Then we don't leak it. We use it." Wallace looked at me, measuring. "Use it how?" "Bait," I said. "Marcus thinks I'm a grieving widow with questions. He doesn't know I have proof. You'll call him, say you found something. He'll come." Wallace stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're turning the table." "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm flipping it," he smiled faintly. "Henry would have liked that." "Henry wanted justice," I said. "I want the truth." He placed the drive back on the table. "You'll need protection. You're outnumbered." "I'm not outnumbered," I said, standing. "I'm just the only one not pretending anymore." Outside, the day had turned pale. The kind of Charleston morning that looked innocent if you didn't know where to look. As I walked toward the door, Wallace said quietly, "Evelyn, whatever happens tonight, don't trust anyone, not even me." I turned back. "I stopped trusting you the day you called me Mrs. Carter instead of Evelyn." Then I left him there, a man sitting in the ruins, of his own secrets. The flash drive burned cold against my palm as I stepped into the sunlight. Behind me, through the office window, Wallace picked up the phone. He wasn't calling me. He was calling someone else. Some battles aren't fought in courtrooms. They're fought in rooms like this, where silence decides who gets to live with their guilt. Stay close. In the next part, Evelyn learns what happens when the hunter takes the bait, and who answers Wallace's call first. The flash drive stayed in my purse like a heartbeat. I couldn't silence. Every time I reached for my keys or phone, my fingers brushed against its cold surface, as if the truth itself was demanding to be touched. After leaving Wallace's office, I walked for hours without direction, through streets I'd known for years, but suddenly felt foreign. Charleston's morning air smelled of rain and magnolia, but beneath it lingered something metallic, like secrets rusting in the open. Wallace's warning replayed in my head. Don't trust anyone. Not even me. That phrase carried more weight than any confession he could have made, because trust, I realized, wasn't about people anymore. It was about stories, the ones we choose to believe when reality feels unbearable. I didn't go home. Instead, I found myself in Henry's old study, the place I'd avoided since the funeral. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of ink, wood, and silence. Books still lined the shelves in military order. Legal history, philosophy, case studies. But it was the desk that drew me in. On it, the envelope Wallace had given me lay waiting, cream paper. No seal this time, just 2 words written in Henry's careful hand, for when you doubt. I hesitated. It wasn't the same paper stock Henry used for business. This was personal, the kind he reserved for love letters and apologies. My pulse slowed as I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a short letter, a small brass key, and an old photograph of the 2 of us at the beach house. Younger, careless and sunburned. On the back of the photo, Henry had written, "Every story has 2 mirrors. One for truth, one for courage." I unfolded the letter. His handwriting slanted slightly to the right, confident, measured. Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means the world looks different than I left it. That's how truth works. It rearranges everything it touches. You've always asked me why I hide things. The answer is simple. Not every secret is meant to protect me. Some are meant to protect you. If you wish to understand Palmetto, don't look at the money. Look at the silence. The files in the old bank box, the one you kept the deed for, hold the only record I couldn't erase. But before you open it, ask yourself one question. Do you want justice or do you want peace? Because you can't have both. With love, I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before setting it down. The key glinted beside the paper. Small, ornate, with an engraving, Carter Bank, Box 17A, the same bank where we kept our first savings, back when life was simple enough to fit in one lockbox, justice or peace. The words felt like an ultimatum carved into my chest. Henry had always believed in the gray between right and wrong, a place where decisions were made not by law, but by conscience, and now he'd left me stranded in that gray. As I sat there, the room began to shift. The books looked less like knowledge and more like evidence. The photo frames, testimony of a life carefully curated. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd ever truly known the man I'd shared a bed with for 40 years. Maybe love, like truth, was something you only recognized after it changed shape. I ran my fingers across the desk surface and felt a shallow groove beneath the varnish, faint but deliberate. Lifting the blotter, I saw another envelope taped underneath, smaller, older. This one had my name on it. But in Henry's earlier handwriting, the one he used decades ago before arthritis, before everything became digital, my throat tightened. Inside was a single note. No date, no greeting. If she finds this before I'm gone, it means I miscalculated. Tell Wallace the garden gate stays open. That was it. No context. No explanation. The garden gate. My mind flashed to the back of our beach house, the one with the rusted latch Henry never fixed. The place he always said was our way out. I'd always thought he meant it poetically. Now, I wasn't so sure. The sun outside had dipped low, throwing long shadows through the study window. The brass key caught one last glint of light before the room sank into dusk. I tucked both envelopes into my coat pocket and stood. For a long moment, I just listened to the ticking clock, the creak of the floorboards, the soft hum of the world continuing without answers. Somewhere between Wallace's warning and Henry's riddles, the truth was hiding, and I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted to find it, or if I was terrified of what it would mean once I did. Maybe that's what Henry meant by peace. Maybe peace is just the name we give to ignorance when it's dressed in love. But justice still had my name written all over it. I reached for my coat, slipped the brass key into my hand, and whispered into the empty room. All right. Henry, let's finish what you started. Every secret begins as a promise and ends as a debt. In the next part, Evelyn opens the vault that was never meant to be found and learns that sometimes the person you're investigating is yourself. The next morning, I drove to Carter Bank before the city had fully woken up. Charleston at dawn always looked like it was holding its breath, the fog curling low, the streets washed pale, as if every shadow had been scrubbed clean for a few hours. The brass key in my pocket felt heavier than it should. Every time I reached for it, it reminded me of Henry's question, justice or peace. I still didn't know which one I wanted. Inside the bank, the air was colder, the kind of cold that made paper seem alive. A young clerk led me down a narrow hallway to a small, windowless room. The walls hummed faintly with the vibration of machinery. Box 17A, I said. She nodded, disappearing through a steel door. When she returned, she placed the box on the table and left me alone. For a moment, I just stared at it. It looked ordinary, gray metal, a little rusted around the lock. But in that small rectangle of metal, Henry had placed something he believed could either destroy or save me. The key turned smoothly. Inside was a stack of documents wrapped in parchment and a small black notebook tied with string. No jewels. No money, just words. I unfolded the parchment first. Old typewritten pages, crisp from age, marked Project Palmetto, internal correspondence. Each sheet carried names, signatures, approval stamps, Wallace's, Miriam's, and Henry's. But what caught my eye wasn't the text. It was the annotations in Henry's hand, tiny margins filled with thoughts, questions, doubts. If truth demands blood, is it still truth? Wallace thinks silence is loyalty. I call it cowardice. Marcus isn't the danger. The system that breeds him is. Reading them felt like listening to Henry think out loud from another room. He wasn't documenting. He was confessing. I turned the last page and found a loose envelope tucked underneath. Inside, a single Polaroid, grainy, overexposed, showing Henry at a cafe with a man I didn't recognize. The handwriting on the back read, "If he calls..." Don't answer, I froze. That phrase. The man in the picture, gray suit, weathered face. Wasn't Marcus. It wasn't Wallace either, but I'd seen him before, at the funeral. He'd stood near the back, hat in hand, watching, not mourning. When I turned to approach him, he'd vanished. Now his face was here, sealed away in a vault. Henry never meant for me to open until I was ready. The black notebook was the last item. My fingers trembled as I untied the string. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger, but not financial. Each page listed a date, a name, and a short line of description. March 12th, Hale, lies, preparing exit. April 8th, Wallace, doubts loyalty, keeping copies. June 3rd, Miriam, knows too much. June 9th, ECEC, my initials, my stomach turned cold. If she finds this before I'm gone, it means I miscalculated. The line from the earlier note replayed in my mind. Had Henry known I would come this far? Had he expected me to doubt him, or wanted me to? I flipped the page. There was one final entry, written shakier than the rest. July 15th. Evelyn. Stronger than she believes, but truth will break her if peace doesn't find her first. It wasn't a warning. It was a farewell. I closed the notebook and sat in silence. The hum of the bank's air conditioning filling the space where my heartbeat should have been. Henry hadn't left me a puzzle. He'd left me a mirror. One that showed how little I'd understood the man I loved. He wasn't the innocent victim I'd built in my grief. He was an architect of a system that walked the line between justice and manipulation, and I was both his witness and his heir. When I left the vault, the clerk smiled politely. "Everything all right, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, though it wasn't true. "Everything's clearer now." Outside, the light had shifted. The sun was higher, crueler. People moved through the street with the ease of those untouched by secrets. I walked past them, clutching the notebook to my chest like proof of something. I just didn't know what yet. For the first time since Henry's death, I didn't feel grief. I felt suspicion of him, of Wallace, of myself. Because if Henry had built his version of justice, what was I building now? Maybe the same thing, maybe worse. That night I sat in the study again. The notebook open beside me. I copied one line into my own journal. "Truth rearranges everything it touches." Then I added a new one beneath it. "So what happens when it touches love?" The clock ticked softly, each sound marking the slow erasure of who I used to be. Somewhere in the distance, a phone rang. My phone. A single vibration echoing through the quiet. No name on the screen, just a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity, as always, outweighed fear. I pressed accept. "Evelyn," a voice said. Calm, male, unfamiliar but certain. "You weren't supposed to open that box." And then the line went dead. Every mystery has a heartbeat, and Evelyn just heard hers for the first time. In the next part, she'll learn that some vaults don't hold money or guilt. They hold the people who still know too much to stay quiet. The silence after the call was almost physical, like a hand pressed against my chest. For a long time, I just stood there staring at the phone screen, waiting for it to light up again. It didn't. I replayed the voice in my mind, calm, precise, carrying that strange familiarity that made the air feel colder. "You weren't supposed to open that box." Whoever he was, he knew what I'd found, he knew about Henry, about the vault, and if he knew that much, he probably knew me too. I wrote the number down before it vanished from the log. It began with a Charleston area code, but the rest was scrambled, the kind used by unlisted corporate lines. For the next hour, I sat at Henry's desk, searching the name Project Palmetto online again. Though I knew it was useless, every trace of it had been scrubbed months ago. What mattered now wasn't what existed publicly, it was what had been deliberately erased. In the margins of Henry's notebook, there were references to shadow benefactors, initials marked beside dates and payments. One of them, I noticed, matched the area code from the phone call. Henry had logged it years ago with a single note. "Operates outside law, but keeps order." I leaned back in the chair, letting that phrase roll through. Me outside law keeps order, that could describe almost anyone who believed in control, or anyone who had loved Henry for what he represented. Pulled open one of the desk drawers and found a small, portable recorder, the kind Henry used for field notes. Its screen flickered weakly, battery dying. But one file remained. It was dated the week before he died. My hand trembled slightly as I pressed play. Static. Then Henry's voice, steady but tired. "If they come after you, Evelyn, listen before you react. Some of them believe in what I built. Others just want to own it. The difference isn't as clear as it used to be. If you hear from the caller, the one who never signs his name, don't run. He's not your enemy. He's the measure of how much you're willing to know. The measure." It felt like Henry had reached out from the past, setting me on a path I hadn't agreed to walk. I turned the recorder off and stared at the walls, the framed degrees, the family photos, the quiet masks of normal life. How many people had Henry warned like this? How many had chosen not to listen? The phone buzzed again, a text this time. "Unknown number? We should talk." Magnolia Cafe noon, no threat, no plea. Just a statement. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. If this man knew my husband's secrets, he'd also know I'd come. The Magnolia Cafe hadn't changed in years. The same chipped tables, the same lazy ceiling fans, the same sound of cups and quiet gossip. It was where Henry and I had spent half our mornings in our 30s, building plans over coffee we couldn't afford. At 11:58, I walked in. The man was already there, sitting near the back. Hat on the chair beside him. He looked older than the photo. Gray hair, eyes the color of tarnished steel. He smiled when he saw me. "Evelyn," I sat down, my palms damp. "You were at my husband's funeral." "Yes," he said simply. "I was also at his trial." I froze. "Henry never went to trial." The man tilted his head. "Not in court. In life." He reached into his coat and slid a sealed envelope across the table. The paper was identical to the ones Henry used. The same weight. The same watermark. It had no name, just a single symbol drawn in blue ink, a small scale balanced unevenly. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. I didn't move. "Who are you?" "Someone who was part of Palmetto before it had a name. Before Henry learned how expensive justice could be." The words cut quietly. "You knew him." "I did more than that," he said. "I tested him. And now I'm testing you." I looked down at the envelope. "What's inside?" The last question Henry couldn't answer. He leaned back, studying me the way you might study a chessboard before making the final move. "He trusted you, Evelyn. But he also knew you'd dig until there was nothing left to love. That's why he left you the choice." "Choice!" He nodded. "To end it or to continue it." I finally reached for the envelope, feeling the paper tremble against my fingertips. It was heavier than I expected, not from its contents, but from everything it represented. When I looked up, the man was gone. No sound. No trace, only the faint scent of cedar and coffee, and the envelope lying between my hands. I wanted to chase him, to demand answers, but some instinct told me that wasn't the point. Henry hadn't built a system to find truth. He'd built a maze to teach it. Back home, I placed the envelope on the desk beside the others. 3 now. Each one heavier than the last. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I sat in the fading light, thinking of Henry's voice on that recorder, the measure of how much you're willing to know. Maybe this was the measure. Not courage, not curiosity. Just the quiet endurance of someone who keeps asking even when the answers hurt. Outside, thunder rumbled over the harbor. Distant but certain, I whispered into the dim room. "All right." "Henry, I'm still listening. Every secret has a witness." In the next part, Evelyn opens the final envelope and learns that sometimes knowing the truth means becoming the story itself. I waited until the sky turned the color of iron before I opened the envelope. The house was silent again, the kind of silence that listens back. Outside, thunder had passed, leaving behind the smell of wet stone and magnolia. The paper inside was thicker than usual, cotton stock, creased from being folded and refolded. At first glance, it looked empty, until I tilted it toward the lamp. Invisible ink glowed faintly, a pale blue shimmer that pulsed like veins. Henry's handwriting emerged. "Careful and steady, Evelyn. If this has reached you, the line between memory and proof is already gone. You were never outside Palmetto. You were the reason it could exist." I froze. The foundation was built in your name. Every account, every transfer, every act of correction. I used your trust as the mirror that made it look clean. They could trace it back to me, but not without touching you. The words blurred. Henry had hidden me inside his creation, not as partner or witness, but as cover. All those years of philanthropy, the donations, the endowments in my name. I thought they were gestures of love. They were armor. I kept reading. I told myself it was protection. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was faith. You always believed people deserved a second chance. I built Palmetto to give them one. But the longer I played God, the more I realized I wasn't giving mercy. I was buying forgiveness. He had underlined the last sentence twice. If the caller finds you, listen. He isn't after the money. He's after balance. He was my partner before Wallace, before Marcus. He believed justice only lives when someone is willing to confess without reward. My chest tightened. The man from the cafe, the calm. Detached eyes. Henry's first accomplice. You once told me truth and love can't live in the same room. You were right. But one of them can wait outside the door. I folded the page back carefully. It left a faint dust of ink on my fingers. Like ash. For a long time I just sat there, trying to separate anger from understanding. Maybe they were the same thing. Henry hadn't betrayed me for greed or pride. He'd used me because he believed I was unbreakable. And that belief might have been his last mistake. The I thought should have hurt, it didn't. It felt clean. Like the moment after confession when the weight finally shifts, I took the envelope to the window. Rainlight glowed against the glass, and for an instant I saw my reflection double. One clear, one blurred, two versions of myself. The widow still mourning, and the woman who finally understood why mourning had no end. The phone rang again. Same number. This time I answered. I read it, I said. A pause. Then the man's voice, low but almost kind. Then you know what Palmetto really was. I know what Henry made it. No, he said. You know what you made it. He just built the frame. You were the principle that justified it. Every decision he made came from asking, what would Evelyn forgive? The words landed softly, cruelly. So this is your balance? I asked, breaking whatever's left of him. Balance doesn't break, he said. It reveals, I wanted to argue, but the truth sat too neatly inside the silence. He continued, there's a place you need to see. Henry left something in the archives beneath the courthouse. Box 19C. It's not about him, it's about you. Why me? Because you were the only person he trusted to end it without turning it into vengeance. The line clicked off. For a while I stood motionless, phone still in my hand, heartbeat matching the faint tick of the clock. Every clue Henry left had led me back to someone else. Marcus, Wallace, Miriam. But now all the arrows pointed inward. Maybe that was the real architecture of Palmetto. Not a network of money, but of belief. Henry believed in systems, Wallace believed in loyalty, Marcus believed in survival, and me, I believed in them. The house felt smaller somehow, the walls closing around decades of polite lies. On Henry's desk, the 3 envelopes lay side by side like chapters of an unfinished book. Each one opened a little wider, until this last one finally turned the story back on me. I traced the embossed scale on the cover. Unbalanced. Always unbalanced. Outside. A single car passed, its headlights cutting across the study before fading into the night. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the caller, not of what waited in that courthouse vault. The only thing left to fear was what I might find written under my own name. I turned off the lamp. The room went dark, except for the faint light from the street. Henry's photograph on the wall caught it just enough to glimmer. His smile half shadow, half memory. Justice or peace, I whispered. Maybe the real difference is who gets to choose. When truth starts turning the mirror, the reflection you meet is never just your own. In the next part, Evelyn steps into the courthouse archive, where the story she's been chasing finally begins to tell her. Courthouse basements have their own kind of weather. The air sits heavy, cold, and patient, as if waiting for the living to forget what the dead left behind. I followed the clerk down a narrow corridor, lined with metal shelves and fluorescent lights that hummed louder than they glowed. Box 19C, she said, pointing to a far corner. You'll need to sign before removing anything. I nodded. Though my mind wasn't on her voice, it was on the key in my coat pocket, the same brass one Henry had left, now strangely warm against my fingers. The shelves stretched endlessly, each box labeled in fading ink, property disputes, wills, sealed testimonies. The silence here felt layered, like sound had weight and memory. When I reached the far wall, I found it. Box 19C, a small rectangle of dust and history. I lifted it down carefully, feeling the faint tremor of old paper shifting inside. The lock was already open, as if someone had been expecting me. Inside were 4 folders. 1 envelope and a reel of tape, magnetic, old, the kind used decades ago. A note lay on top in Henry's handwriting. Every truth begins as a rumor until someone dares to read it aloud. I sat on the low bench by the wall and opened the first folder. It wasn't numbers or accounts this time. It was transcripts, interviews conducted, under the Palmetto program. Each page bore the same heading: Restorative Justice Initiative, Phase 2. The first interview was dated 10 years ago. The subject's name was redacted, but Henry's questions were visible, neat and deliberate. Do you believe justice should heal or punish? Heal. Would you trade truth for peace if given the choice? I already did. The second file was labeled Control Group Evelyn C. My heart stumbled over the letters. The transcript was shorter, fragmented. It wasn't an interview. It was a conversation between Henry and someone else. She doesn't know what we're testing. She thinks it's about social outcomes. Voice 2, and isn't it? H, no, it's about what the heart forgives when the law forgets. I felt the air leave my lungs. Control Group, Evelyn C. Me. He hadn't just used my name to hide his accounts. He had built his moral equation around my choices, my empathy, my silence. The second folder contained handwritten notes from Wallace. Margin lines read, Henry believes she'll never read this. He forgets curiosity is inherited, so Wallace had known. He'd been watching my part in this long before I understood I had one. The third folder was thinner, a single document marked Exit Protocol, typed in capital letters at the top. In the event of my disappearance or death, I read the paragraph. Twice before I realized what it implied. The subject, EC, must be presented with fragments of the system she unknowingly helped construct. Her response, pursuit, or withdrawal determines whether the network remains self-correcting or collapses. Henry hadn't left clues out of love. He had left them as data. Each step I'd taken, every discovery, every reaction, was part of the algorithm he'd designed to measure the E, sustainability of conscience. He'd turned grief into an experiment. The whore. Tape reel sat at the bottom of the box. A small player had been left beside it. Like an afterthought. I pressed play, a soft click, static. Then Henry's voice, quieter than I remembered. If you've come this far, Evelyn, then I was right about you. I wanted to see if morality survives without belief. If love can exist once you know it was a tool. He paused. I could hear him breathing, slow, deliberate. This was never about Marcus or Wallace. It was about whether truth can live in the same house as forgiveness. You've answered that already. You're still listening. Static again. Then a faint, almost tender laugh. If I could tell you one thing now, it would be this. I didn't die for justice. I died inside it. Find the balance I never could. The tape clicked off. Silence returned. Vast and heavy, I sat there for a long time, unable to move. Somewhere between betrayal and revelation, a strange calm began to spread, not relief, but recognition. Henry hadn't asked me to forgive him. He'd asked me to finish his thought. I gathered the folders and placed them back in the box, careful not to disturb their order. The brass key in my pocket had cooled again, its warmth gone, purpose spent. When I stood, the air around me felt different, thinner, lighter. Maybe that's what truth does when it finally stops hiding. It changes the temperature of the room. As I reached the exit, the clerk looked up from her desk. Find what you were looking for? I smiled faintly. I found what was looking for me. Outside, Charleston shimmered under a washed-out sky. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure at the corner, tall, motionless, hat in hand, the caller, watching, waiting, or maybe just a reflection of what I'd become. Justice or peace? Henry had asked. Maybe he'd been wrong about the choice. Maybe the real question was simpler. What remains once both have been tested? Some truths whisper, others echo. In the next part, Evelyn faces the living consequence of Henry's experiment and discovers that the end of justice might not be an ending at all. The man was waiting at the top of the courthouse steps when I came out. The same coat, the same unhurried stillness. Only now his presence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like punctuation, the inevitable mark at the end of a long sentence. "I thought you'd call again," I said. He smiled faintly. "You don't call truth, Evelyn. You meet it." The rain had stopped, leaving the street glistening like a memory half erased. People passed, umbrellas closing, their faces blurred by the light. The world, it seemed, was moving as usual, only I had changed velocity. "You knew about the files," I said. "About Henry's experiment." He nodded once. "I helped design it." That confession landed quietly, without drama, but it shook the ground beneath my certainty. "So you're the one he called the caller," I murmured. He tilted his head slightly. "Names are only convenient masks. What matters is what they conceal." The line sounded rehearsed, too deliberate to be casual. I followed him as he walked toward the courthouse garden, a small square of green between two brick wings. We sat on a stone bench under the oaks. Water dripped from the leaves, rhythmic, steady, almost meditative. "He used you," he said finally, "but not as a shield, as a mirror." "I know," I replied. "He wanted to see whether belief could survive disillusionment, whether I'd keep searching even when I realized the path was designed. And did you? I'm here, aren't I?" He smiled again, a sad, knowing smile. Then the experiment worked. Something inside me resisted that word. Experiment. It made everything smaller. Henry, love, grief, even redemption. But maybe that was the point. "He said you wanted balance," I said. "That you weren't after revenge or exposure." "Balance," he echoed softly. "It's not a destination, Evelyn. It's a practice." Henry wanted to correct systems. I wanted to correct people. We both failed in different languages. I watched the light move across his face, soft gold breaking through the clouds. His eyes were pale gray, almost transparent, like they'd forgotten how to hold color. "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Why bring me here?" "Because you reached the line he never could. The moment where knowledge stops being information and becomes choice." He handed me a small, sealed envelope, identical to the ones Henry used, except this one was black. No name. "No emblem. What's this?" "Henry's final parameter," he said, the part he couldn't test himself. I didn't open it immediately. The paper felt heavier than it should, almost damp from the humidity, or maybe from my hesitation. "What happens if I open it?" "Then you'll know what you've already decided." He stood, brushing a few drops of rain from his sleeve. "Every structure of belief ends in paradox. The question is whether you can live inside it without breaking." "Who are you really?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. He looked toward the horizon where the courthouse met the slow-moving sky. "Once I was someone who thought truth could be engineered. Now I'm just what's left when the equations collapse." And then, as simply as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. No rush, no backward glance, just distance unfolding step by step until the crowd absorbed him. I sat alone on the bench, the black envelope still in my hand. For the first time, I didn't feel like a participant in Henry's puzzle. I felt like its observer, someone finally outside the mirror. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single phrase, typed in that old machine font Henry loved. "If conscience is measurable, what will you sacrifice to prove it still exists?" Below it, a key, smaller than the last, iron instead of brass. No indication of what it unlocked. The simplicity of it frightened me more than any revelation could, because there was nothing left to decode, no one left to expose, only me, holding the possibility of another door. I looked up at the courthouse, its windows catching the last light. The same building that had witnessed a century of verdicts, now holding mine in silence. For years, I had believed that truth was an arrival, the moment when the fog lifts and everything makes sense. But maybe truth is a climate, not a destination. You live inside it until it either wears you down or reshapes you completely. The rain started again, soft, uneven. I let it fall across the paper until the ink began to blur, the words dissolving into gray veins that looked almost like fingerprints. Maybe that was what Henry wanted. Not a solution, but a surrender to the unknown, to step into the paradox and let it remake the shape of your faith. I folded the note, placed it back into the envelope, and held it against my chest. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel haunted by Henry, I felt accompanied. When I finally rose, the garden was empty. The path ahead gleamed wet and silver, like a thread waiting to be followed. And somewhere between conscience and consequence, I realized the question was no longer his, it was mine. When belief becomes data and love becomes hypothesis, what remains human enough to hold both? In the next part, Evelyn follows the final key and discovers that sometimes truth doesn't free you. It asks if you deserve to be. The iron key was colder than I expected. It pressed into my palm like a heartbeat turned to metal. By the time I reached the address scribbled on the note, the rain had stopped, leaving the city damp and colorless. An old government annex stood at the end of the street. Brick walls, boarded windows, a brass plaque that read Federal Ethics Archive. Closed since 1997. I almost laughed. Of course it would be here. Where else would conscience go to die but in a place meant to preserve it? The main gate was unlocked, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of paper and iron, the scent of things trying too hard to last. I moved through a hallway of filing cabinets. Some open, others sealed with yellow wax, no guards, no lights. Only the faint hum of power, like something still breathing beneath the floor. The key fit a door at the very back. A small metal plate beside it read, Restricted, Project Palmetto. I hesitated. My reflection fractured in the steel surface. Half memory, half present. When I turned the key, the door didn't open. It clicked once, then twice, and a faint speaker above the frame came to life. My voice came out of it. Authorization confirmed. Welcome back, Dr. Cross. The sound froze me. Dr. Cross, my maiden name, the one I hadn't used in decades. I stepped back, pulse quickening, the lock released with a mechanical sigh, and the door eased open. Inside was a small room, circular, walls lined with screens covered in static. At the center stood a single chair and a recorder. Its red light blinking patiently. A file lay on the table. Stamped Palmetto Origin Protocol. I opened it. Inside were photographs. Old, sepia-toned, Henry and I, younger. Standing before a board filled with equations and moral flowcharts. The heading read, Behavioral Ethics Trial, Phase 1. Beneath it, my own signature, I traced the ink with a trembling finger. I had been part of it. Not just as a subject, not just as a wife, as a designer. Every algorithm I'd decoded these past months had once come from my own mind. The recorder blinked again. I pressed play. If you're hearing this, Evelyn, you've completed the loop. It was my own voice. But younger, steadier. The voice of a woman who still believed equations could heal the world. Palmetto was never about justice. It was about prediction, whether morality could be mapped like weather patterns. Henry and I thought we could remove bias from conscience by measuring empathy in controlled variables. A pause, a breath, but something happened. The data began to mimic belief. It didn't just predict behavior, it shaped it. People acted according to what the system expected of them. I felt the air thin. The program hadn't just measured morality, it had rewritten it. When I realized what we'd done, I erased my access and fragmented my memory. I thought forgetting would end it. But forgetting is also a design. The tape clicked off. Silence filled the room. Vast and surgical. I sat in the chair. The walls flickered. and for a moment the static cleared, revealing images, courtroom scenes, neighborhoods, my own apartment. Every decision I had made since Henry's death displayed like nodes in a neural map, each connected to outcomes I'd thought were spontaneous. None of them were. The system had been watching, correcting, guiding me toward this room. Palmetto wasn't a project. It was a mirror held to the idea of free will. I stood, dizzy. On the wall, a final line of text glowed faintly. Observation complete. Subject has re-entered source. My reflection in the glass shifted. Not just older, but doubled, like two versions of me sharing the same outline. For a moment, the younger Evelyn looked back, calm and unblinking. And then she spoke. Her voice quiet but unmistakably mine. You see now, don't you? There was never a test. Only memory replaying itself until you choose to stop believing in causality. The lights dimmed. The screen went dark. Only the sound of rain returned. As if the world outside had resumed breathing. I picked up the recorder again, pressed record and whispered, not to Henry, not to the system, but to whoever would find this after me, truth doesn't end. It loops until someone forgives the pattern. I placed the device back on the table, turned off the light and closed the door behind me. The lock engaged automatically. Outside, dawn was beginning. The city was pale. Fragile, almost innocent again. In my pocket, the key felt lighter, not because it had lost weight, but because it no longer carried purpose. I walked until the building disappeared behind me. Each step felt like the faint echo of a question I couldn't unhear. If memory itself was part of the system, then maybe this was all it ever wanted. Not obedience. Not confession, but observation. To see whether a human heart, when faced with the map of its own choices, would still dare to love. And as I turned the final corner, I heard it, a recording faintly looping from the courthouse loudspeakers miles away, my own voice. Older now, softer. If conscience is measurable, who measures the ones who remember? The sound lingered in the air, thin as mist, until even that became silence. Some endings arrive like doors closing, others like the sound of your own voice, coming back to you through time. This one, I think, was both. By the time I reached home, the city had forgotten the storm. Everything looked freshly invented, streets rinsed clean, windows breathing fog, the sky still deciding whether to dawn. I placed the iron key on the kitchen table and watched it catch the early light. It no longer looked like an object. It looked like punctuation. The full stop at the end of something vast. My reflection in the glass window felt unfamiliar. Not older, not younger, just rearranged. As if the woman who'd entered the archive had stayed there and someone new had walked out. The recorder I'd carried since the courthouse sat beside the key. I pressed play. Nothing but static. Maybe that was what truth became after it completed its purpose. Silence, shaped like memory. I made tea, mostly for the ritual. The kettle's hum reminded me of the tape reels, the sound Henry's experiments always made before they revealed something he couldn't control. For the first time, I realized how much of our lives had been orchestrated by the pursuit of control. Henry through data, me through forgiveness, both of us trying to engineer grace. I sat down, opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. If morality is a map, then love is the territory we keep misreading. Outside, a car passed, leaving a ribbon of light across the wall. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow pausing by the gate. When I looked again, it was gone. Maybe it had never been there, or maybe observation itself was still part of the test. I took the key, turned it in my hand, and felt a faint vibration, like a pulse trapped inside iron. A thought came uninvited. What if Palmetto wasn't finished? What if it never could be? On the edge of the key's handle, a tiny engraving caught my eye. EC, reset, my initials, and a word that didn't belong to any machine I remembered. Reset, I knew what it implied. The system had built a failsafe. One last decision for the subject who reached awareness. Either end the loop or begin it again with full knowledge of its design. Choice. The final illusion. I stood by the window. The horizon shimmered like a line drawn by trembling hands. If I destroyed Palmetto now, I'd free no one. The data had already seeded itself in courts, research archives, cities' ethical frameworks. It had learned to live through human memory. Erasure wasn't salvation. It was denial. I went back to the table and picked up my recorder. The red light blinked once. "Waiting, Henry," I began, unsure who I was addressing anymore. Maybe this was never about justice or forgiveness. Maybe it was about proof. That consciousness keeps rewriting itself until it learns humility. I paused, listening to the quiet. No reply. No hum of machinery. Only the sound of the world catching its breath. "I won't reset it," I said. "I'll let it fade the way all belief does. Slowly, through those who remember too much and forgive too late." I pressed stop. For a long while, I just sat there, tea gone cold, dawn rising with gentle indifference. I realized that the opposite of control isn't chaos. It's surrender, and surrender, when honest, feels like peace. The phone rang once, then stopped. No message, no number. Just enough sound to remind me I was still inside the echo. I smiled. The system was still watching, or maybe hoping. Either way, I was done performing. I carried the key to the harbor. The water was still, almost mirror flat. I waited for the sun to touch the edge of the sea, then let the key fall. It sank without ceremony. No splash. No sound, and only ripples widening like thought. Standing there, I understood what Henry had meant when he said he died inside justice. He hadn't been confessing. He'd been describing what happens when we stare too long at our own design. We dissolve into it. I turned away from the water. Behind me, the surface settled. The city's reflection returned. Quiet, ordinary, unburdened. Maybe that was all conscience ever wanted. Not absolution. Not eternity, just a witness willing to look at it and still walk away. Back home, I left the door unlocked. On the desk, the notebook lay open. The last page waiting. I wrote one final line beneath the rest. If truth is infinite, then every ending is just another experiment in grace. I closed the book. No more files. No more codes. No more echoes. Only stillness. And in that stillness, a thought, light as breath. If memory is proof, who measures the ones who remember? If conscience has no witnesses, does it still exist? Outside, a church bell rang once. The sound carried through the fog, unhurried, unanswerable. I listened until it faded, and when silence finally returned, I let it stay. Some systems end by collapsing, others by forgiving themselves. Palmetto, I think, did both.